Order. Today is March 6th. Thank you all for coming. I know Elida is not going to make it tonight, and Carl is supposed to join us via Zoom, but I believe we have a quorum with who we have at the table. Thank you all for coming tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment and have the minutes reflect the passing of Jean Lawrence. Jean was an important source of information, particularly regarding the Hoss's house, which our committee was researching just recently. I worked with Jean for 3 years on the historical board, and she was a very important member of the community. I spoke to her on Saturday about the Hoss's house. She emailed me on Sunday with information about the remaining descendant of the Hosses, who I believe lives down on Back Cove Road. And then she passed away on Monday, so it was kind of a freaky occurrence. But anyway, we're going to miss her. The minutes are not available for review at this time, so I'd like to have a motion to postpone review of the minutes from the February 6th meeting until the next April meeting.
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Okay, anybody have any questions about that? All in favor of approving the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. So we'll review those minutes at the next meeting. Everybody saw a copy of the agenda. We have 2 items from previous meetings to deal with under old business. One is the fire department. I was charged with contacting the chief of the fire department and talking to him about the potential or possibility of using a controlled burn to get rid of the Hoss's house, should that be the direction we want to go. He indicated that there would be significant expense in prepping the house, which we'll talk about in a little bit, because it's the same expense that would be incurred if we were to put it on the market and try to have it sold. Also, in light of the work done by the Hoss's House Subcommittee, I think we are going to recommend that destruction of the house be the choice of last resort. So I don't think we need to do anything more with the fire chief at this time. Are there any questions? Okay. At the last meeting, we formed a Hoss's House Subcommittee. Myself, Gail, Patty, and Carl. We met several times during the month. And then most recently, we had a walkthrough with a professional contractor who restores old houses, contractor who salvages old houses, and several real estate agents. I contacted all the real estate agents in Waldoboro. The ones from Jarrett and Cone showed up. The ones from William Ravis and Lash did not. And then the contractor plus Fossil brought his real estate agent with him because they had worked on restoration of old houses together before. So what I'd like to do at this time is turn it over to Gail to go through the summary or to handle the discussion of the Hoss's house investigation. She sent out a pretty thorough report. I hope people had a chance to look at it, because it really does summarize all the information that we cleared. Okay, Gail.
Sure. Okay. So I really do hope folks have had a chance to at least thumb through this, because we collected a good amount of information.
Amazing.
Probably too much to talk about tonight. In any case, the things that we discovered that were I guess surprising. I guess the thing that was the most surprising was the incredibly good shape that this house is in after being vacant for several decades and having a giant gash in the roof where water has been able to come in. The damage from the leak in the roof is pretty localized. It really did not do damage to the surrounding timbers. The only area, like there's an area of the floor that's damaged directly underneath it, but not a lot of damage from a big old hole in the roof. A little bit of mold, not a tragic mold problem. And everything is stable and in really good shape. And those were the comments of everyone who went through the building. So I really want to make sure that that everyone understands that none of this is my impression or Patty's impression or Carl's impression or Mark's impression. We really thought it was important to get some folks in who work in these businesses and don't really have any skin in the game to give us some sense of what's going on. The house really felt like it was crying out to be reoccupied. I figure if you've been empty for 30 years and you haven't and you're still standing that strong, that really says something about the house. So just based on that, the really incredible shape of the house is in, we're reluctant to consider a flat out demolition of the house as a first recommendation. We did have, we were fortunate enough to have a former colleague of mine from DEP who I've called on in the past when houses were being demolished or undergoing major renovations, to have someone from DEP come out and kind of just do an informal walkthrough about the asbestos situation. There are a lot of things that DEP doesn't have the ability to actually manage, but they're often willing to just provide some insight and comments to people when they're in that kind of situation. So Joe DiStefano, who's someone that I've worked with in the past, came out and walked through the house just to get an idea of what might be required if the house was demoed. It was a visual, informal walkthrough, not a true assessment. But he did note that, as we knew, the shingles on the outside of the house look like they are asbestos containing, although they're really in great shape. They're in incredibly good shape. Looked like there was some asbestos possibly in some of the floor coverings. The ceiling in the kitchen looks like contains asbestos, and he thought there might be some asbestos in a panel in the furnace. All impressionistic, not for sure. In any case, he suggested that a good thing to do would be to contract an asbestos consultant to come out and just take a couple of samples. He would do a walkthrough, or she would do a walkthrough to see what looked like it was asbestos containing. He felt that a licensed contractor could do a better job of just the visual part than he could. Take samples, send them to the lab for a pretty low cost, something like $20 a sample. And for in the ballpark of $300, we would have a full report of what the asbestos situation in the house truly was. That would actually be required if we decided to go with a controlled burn of the property. But even if we didn't, we would know exactly where the asbestos was and what would need to be removed or abated if a demolition or taking the house apart in some way is what we decided to do. The asbestos that he found, there was nothing that by law we would have to remove or abate if the house is sold intact or used intact. So all of the abatement costs would only accrue by law if the house was, if they were being damaged or messed up in some way, so that there was a concern about the asbestos being released. So that was something. He estimated if the house was demoed or taken apart, it would probably be around $10,000 to remove, abate, get rid of the shingles. And about $1,000 per surface of anything that was found, like a floor or countertops or anything like that. So estimate, and it's really an estimate, of around $15,000 for asbestos abatement if we decided to demolish or dismantle the house. That's not a huge cost. It would be an upfront cost. I think when we finished the walkthroughs, we really felt like we wanted to think of some possibilities in between the two extremes of trying to sell the house as is, especially as a residential property, which is what it was and would be the hardest thing to do, and to demolish. Those were the two options that we had sort of started out with. So what we did was we mapped out a couple of intermediate possibilities, again, based on our conversations with the folks who came out. One step down from trying to get the house returned to residential use was one that we had discussed before, which was selling it for commercial use. The realtor from Newcastle who was there was not discouraging about that, but felt like it would be a harder sell to market that property as a commercial property for the obvious reason that it is not in a commercial area. So no one felt comfortable saying, yeah, it's impossible, it's possible, you'll get this much less, it's the same amount. We really don't know. And we'll try to get a little bit more information to help with figuring out what the pluses and minuses of residential versus a commercial sale look like financially. The other options that folks led us to think about were trying to move the house, since it is in such good shape. It really could be moved, have to be sliced in half in order to do that, but I guess people do it all the time. Les Fossil mentioned that the cost of moving a house goes up a lot if you have to move it, if you have to deal with power lines. So finding a way to move it down toward Friendship on the same side of the road would keep the cost down a little bit. His estimate was $50,000 to $70,000 for moving a house of that size, but felt that it could be done without disturbing the ground in a way that would be problematic under the covenant. The guy Mike Alderson, yeah, who is in the business of disassembling old houses that can't stay where they've lived for a long time, and either reconstructing them whole someplace else after they've been taken apart, or at least salvaging the materials to be used in the construction of another property. Has not sent us his notes yet on any kind of cost or feasibility or like which of those options looks better. So we're waiting for that, and we'll share it when it comes along. Yeah. So 5 options, really pushing forward for the option of getting a change to the covenant, selling the property on about 2 acres as close to the road where it doesn't look like the plume is heading. But we again felt like before we made a recommendation to do that, we wanted to really review the old reports on what was going on with the plume, which we really didn't have the time or inclination to do this time through. Yeah.
So I went through some old reports and had Max print out some maps. And this map here was in the packet for the meeting. The dotted blue lines indicate the direction and flow of the contaminants from what I understand. So as you can see, it's all moving well away from the road and from the house's property, which is not the yellow square, but the place next to it. So I printed this out just to emphasize that there does seem to be a fair amount of land that we could include with the house's house that would still keep us fairly far away from the direction of the plume.
I got a couple of questions. I'm sorry, you done?
Gail, do you have anything else?
I would, I have to leave at 5, so if I
Okay.
could steal 5 more minutes to say a couple of things, then that gives me a little bit of time to take questions, but Mark and Patty have been here for the whole thing, so they can answer things as well as I can. We did ask what the value of the house, like the sale value of the house right now in the shape that it's currently in, like without doing anything other than basically cleaning up the garbage inside was. And the estimate we got was around 100,000 with a couple of acres for right now. And the feeling that if the house was fully renovated, it would be worth close to 400,000. So thinking about the fiscal end of things, just put that in your hats and chew on it. The reason that that I wanted to have an estimate of the value was really because in my mind, I've been like trying to do this. I've been thinking a lot about the cost of maintaining the kind of park recreation facility that we've been talking about. Because I really want to make sure, in my heart, I want to make sure that if we go to all the work to make this lovely facility, we also go to the work of making sure we have the resources to maintain it. You know, another broken tennis court, don't need to see that. Yeah, so I thought, well, maybe if we had an idea of what the house was worth and we had an idea of what maintenance for courts would cost over a 10-year period, we could look at that, and possibly if the house was sold, create a way for the funds, for the proceeds from the house to be put someplace where they would be available for that. So that's not my call. It's just what I was thinking. I really just want to make sure that we don't put something up at significant expense and then don't have the resources to keep it up over time. So that's the end of that soapbox. There were 3 things that that we really wanted to recommend the committee send to the select board if that's where it needs to go. ASAP. One was to go ahead and get that asbestos consultant in for $300 or so to really make sure we know what the asbestos situation is. So we really do have a good way of evaluating what the cost of any option short of just selling the house whole would be. It seemed like a pretty good investment, not a lot of money. So we got a list of licensed contractors, a couple of thoughts on who can get out and do a good job really fast that I'm happy to share if we go in that direction. That was one recommendation. The second is to do something that we actually have already committed to doing, and that is cover the darn hole in the roof in a way that is stable, like batten down the tarp, either with town resources if that's possible, or try to get a roofer to come in and do it. No idea how much that runs, but you know, it's great that the house has lasted for 30 years with a hole in the roof. I think if we're contemplating different options, we owe it to that fine old house to put a hat on it and protect it a little bit better than we have. And finally, to just set up a cleanup to go through the house and get the garbage out. Maybe sort through and see if there are some things of value that could be saved and sold. We thought that maybe maybe having a yard sale or something down at the site would actually generate some enthusiasm and excitement about what's going on. The house is getting cleaned up, things are moving forward, and it might, probably wouldn't generate a lot of money, but maybe enough to cover some of the early tasks. So those recommendations I think are important, just to do what we need to do now to get the place cleaned up and stabilized, so that we've got a little bit of time, more time, to get more information and make a final decision. I did ask Marcus if he could send us just an estimate of what the costs of maintaining courts over the course of random number 10 years would be, so we could compare that to the possible cost, the possible income from selling the house. And if that doesn't make sense to anybody else, apology. Sorry,
Did he get back to
he
you?
has not gotten back to me
He
yet.
was out sick last. Yes,
Oh, dear.
so that's, I think that's why, because I know he was working on it.
Okay, yeah.
Before you leave, do you want to talk about
Do I
that
wanna-
grant real quick?
I will talk about the grant real quick. I was spending a lot of time on the internet over the past couple of weeks. Looking at different resources that are available to communities that are restoring sites and properties like we are. The ones that I found, I truly do not know if we're eligible for. I just learned a couple of days ago that this was a RCRA site. I didn't know that before, and that could make a difference in terms of whether, some EPA funds that looked really super duper are available or not. But there are a lot of different funding sources to do this kind of work. And I just felt like it was a good time to start collating that material, starting to look at what might be available, because it might be helpful to think about what it's possible to do, whether $15,000 to do asbestos abatement work is something we need to worry about, or something that would be easy to cover in a grant like that, whether the number that Max just gave me for what it would cost to connect the house to sewer, around 40,000, whether that is prohibitive, or whether, again, that would be something that would be easy to cover in a comprehensive grant. So I think it's hard to make a decision about this without having some information about what resources would be available to do the work that we're talking about, because it certainly shouldn't all be at the expense of the town. John.
Thank you. One thing I want to add, just to give some perspective to the argument for saving the house, is the contractor Les Fossil said the current cost for new construction is about $300 a square foot. So he estimated that building a house of that size new would be in the ballpark of $900 to $1.5 million. And he thinks that if it was sold for ballpark $100,000 and invested $200,000 in renovation, it might sell for $400,000
As residential or commercial?
as residential. So that was I think at the last meeting, I said, I can't imagine anybody spending more than $25,000 for this place. And I was like, oh boy, I didn't know what I was talking about. So I think it is now worth considering, because in the end, it would be a income generating property for property tax for the town long run, plus the initial sale of the house. And I looked at, I came in earlier today and looked at the sale price of the house next to the Methodist Church on Friendship Road, next to the driveway for the button factory. That was a comparable house, I thought, in terms of age and maybe condition, and it sold for $98,000. So. If we're talking about the house's house on an acre, 2 acres, and it's going to be located next to a walking park and recreation facilities, I think it's a real income generating possibility for the town. Anybody have any questions? We have to leave at 5, and we also have Morgan in here to talk about the trails. So I'll open up to questions. John?
First of all, I want to preface my remarks by saying I'm not an engineer, so I don't. But I went in that house about 3 weeks ago, and I'm wondering if, did we see the same house? I mean, that house is an absolute mess. I mean, just the mold, you spoke about mold. In my experience as a respiratory therapist, when you see mold, about 30% more of it is hidden away. So, and I'm just wondering, how did these people, what methodology did they use to assess the structural integrity of that house? Did they just eyeball it? Again, what were their metrics in saying, okay, this is a structurally sound building? I saw that roof. That roof has got a huge hole. It's been raining in there. So that whole roof isn't structurally sound. So again, I'm not trying to be, I love old buildings, I love history, but morally and ethically, I can't, it's my imperative to say what I think. I mean, the asbestos, of those shingles, there's asbestos probably in other places in that house. Those lead pipes I saw in the basement, there's got to be lead in there. They didn't make. So again, just for conversation, there's got to be a point where you say, okay, is the town just driving this because of financial issues or doing the right thing?
So if I could interrupt just for a second. So
Sure.
one of the reasons why we contacted professionals who work in this field all the time was to just
Right.
deal with this, give us knowledgeable
Sure.
information based on what we think. Les Fossil has been doing this work, he said, for 40 years. He has worked in houses like this house.
Right.
He knows what mold looks like. Michael also has worked in this industry, and he knows what the shape of houses is.
Right.
So if you look at the walls, if you look at the foundation, there is no obvious sign of walls cracking, walls falling. If you go into the attic, all the timbers are solid. There's no obvious signs of rot. So
It's a solid house, John.
yeah, and I think.
Again, I don't question. I'm just
We
saying.
understand your concerns, which is why we specifically
Right.
asked about the mold issue.
Right.
And each of them said there are ways to remedy it, even if they take it down piece by piece to
Right.
assemble somewhere else. They have a
Sure.
process of eliminating the mold.
Right.
But
No,
it's,
I don't want to sound like
It is not uncommon to take a house of that size and
Yeah.
or condition and renovate it.
and who am I to say if someone wants to buy that and sink that kind of money in there?
And some people do.
That's a whole other discussion, but I walked through there and I just saw a whole different. I was looking at it from the health hazard because of my 36 years in healthcare.
Mhm.
I didn't look at it, other than what hit me.
And correct me if I'm wrong, if we were to list this property, it's up to somebody to have a disclosure prepared to say, this is what we know about this property. And up to a buyer to determine if
Right.
that's acceptable or to hire their own people to come in and test for those things.
I just want to caution everybody. I don't think we're ever going to be able to sell it as residential.
That's when we watched, we came across a community meeting where Max Louis spoke, and I don't know why I wasn't there, several of them were there. And Max said it was unequivocal, it will never be residential. And then several minutes later, his supervisor, Chris Swain, made it clear that the covenant is amenable. It is not,
With lead vances,
right.
and I don't think you're going to get that from lead vans.
I
So,
don't know
I
if we
just
wa-
want everybody to be very clear.
Well,
I don't want everybody getting excited about that part of it.
yeah, all we're doing is,
Right.
our committee was put together to investigate.
Right.
And I think thank you, Gail. I think the committee will make a recommendation whether or not to move forward with it.
I just wanted to make sure everybody understands that that's a very high bar, not only with the DEP, but with lead vance, and lead vance is. That was, I think we're gonna have a hard
Yes.
time with that one.
Thank you.
If there is stuff that folks would like us to investigate and find out between now and the next time we meet to flesh this out and have some maybe final recommendations in April, would you let,
I'll make sure you find out.
okay.
Do you think you'll see her later?
I'm not gonna do that kind of work.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gail. Okay, so I didn't mean to cut you off,
No,
Tom, but
no.
we've raised that issue before. I just want to see if there's any other questions about the report that Gail prepared. Janet?
I thought it's excellent. I mean, it gives us just a way forward
Yeah.
with better information than we have, so that's good. And as far as the covenant goes, you know, I've talked with some and both of us have been involved with this for a long time. You know, I was looking at back files and I do wonder if, I mean, maybe lead vance will never do it, but we need to have a reason why they will never do it. And then,
Liability,
yeah, but if you look at all the reports,
but it's. And I mean, I recall this during the entire discussion about. The gifting. Is. Somebody moves in. And it becomes, somebody gets, say something, cancer. They don't want to, they don't want to risk that potential liability, even it couldn't be them. But you don't know who's going to move in.
yeah,
And that's whether it was from that or not, why would they expose themselves to that?
So I don't know if it's possible to, what I was hoping could happen was that a parcel of land could be created around the property based on the evidence we have of where the contamination is and how it's moving. And that property would be removed from the covenant.
Well,
I mean, right now, the only reason that the house is in the covenant is because it was part of the property that the,
right,
downward side is going to be exposed to, so.
but lead vance would have to agree to that.
Right.
And I think what happens is, it's a very litigious society we live in, whether we agree with that or not. The reality is, for a corporation like that has had an environmental covenant on the property, is we'd ask them, could you remove it? And I think the driving force behind that is, they sold it, they gifted it to us
Wow.
with the covenant intact. And I think that was one of the reasons they gifted it to us, is they wanted to keep the covenant intact. I also think that during those conversations is the idea of residential there, and having somebody there, you don't know who's going to move in there. You don't know what their health history is. You don't know. And then if something were to happen and they would go back and say, hey, I have this health issue, whether it's related to, or even if it's not related to, that becomes a legal issue for them. Is that a kettle of fish they're going to want
Right.
to open? And I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's, for a corporation, whether we like that conversation or not, I think that's where I think we're going to have the hurdle.
Well, I can speak personally to that because I'm sure you've seen these Camp Lejeune ads. I was a Marine and I was stationed at Camp Lejeune. Now there's billions of dollars in this. They were dumping TCE and benzene in the water, which I drank and I showered in, as did tens of thousands of people. And I can tell you, the litigation is unbelievable. The government didn't tell anyone till years after. So I know how this litigation things go. People will jump on that. There'd be more lawyers and suits. If anybody, like you say, would even imply that they got some type of a cancer, which I did.
Mike,
Yeah, I was wondering, Julie, is there a clause in the contract that gives them the right to object?
We have to have, they have to be in agreement.
They have to be in agreement.
Yeah, I mean, I personally don't think it's worth appealing it. You know, I don't feel like the town, we could try, but if it's lead bands, as you're saying, we're.
I
up
mean,
to-
Lead Vance would have to agree first before we even get into any appeal.
Yeah, it just, to me, that seems like it's not worth it, you know, for $100,000 or 78,000 or whatever it goes for, but just the legal costs. But I feel like if Max, you know, it sounds like Max Luick has said it's a non-starter.
Max is,
It'd be nice to have that almost in writing, just that can't be bent, because the covenant said no cap. You know, and they have, without a conversation with DP, but we now have the okay to go ahead and put a cap on, so.
well,
It'd be
we
just good to have a
we
final-
have to submit a plan again. And so I think what we need to do is really have an idea of what we want to present to the DEP. And we can ask, but he really needs something like, I don't want to keep going and say, hey, we have this idea or this idea. I think we actually have to have a thought of what we're doing and go to him. I mean, I asked him about residential the last time I talked to him. He was very clear. I haven't even had this conversation with our attorney because I don't even know what our attorney would say about residential. Our attorney might have a strong opinion about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
And then,
oh, Jane,
Patty.
I was just gonna ask. We've been talking residential, but what about commercial?
I know,
What about
Same thought.
long-term
that's my view.
problems that may arise? Who's liable?
So one of the issues I have, and somebody else can explain to me, is I don't understand why if somebody's there 9 to 5 or somebody's walking through the field next door playing basketball, there's no health risk. But if somebody's living in the house, which has city water and would eventually have city sewer, there is a health risk. I don't understand the logic of it.
Like I said,
A related question too is Lead Vance going to object to our plans to make an attractive nuisance where people are going to be occupying the site playing pickleball?
well,
So-
I think from what my understanding has been throughout with them is any plan we come up with, they have to approve. When we gave them the original, when we were going through the gifting process, Max drew up a beautiful plan that had fields, recreation on it. So I think they were fine with that. They were fine with that. They were clear during that gifting process, no residential. You know, if you want to go back to the well, we can ask, but I just want everybody to be very clear that that's going to be a heavy lift. And I think we need to find out whether or not Lead Vance is even
Okay.
up for it.
All right, so, Bob,
Yeah, I kind of view this as part of Lead Vance's negotiating process. They gifted it to the town, they said, we'll keep the liability and we'll continue to remediate. But they said, under certain circumstances, you can do things with the property. But we have to agree. If we don't agree, you can't do it. So we walk in the door with a plan. And they say, yeah, we approve of this, subject to you're signing a whole harmless agreement that if we get sued, you stand in our place.
Mhm.
And then they're done. They're free.
okay.
So
So-
I don't think it's that easy.
Well,
It sounds great, Bob, but I mean,
Well,
I think
I'm sorry, if I can interrupt. I want to honor people's time and we have Morgan here. So what I would like to suggest is that the Haas's House Subcommittee reconvene. We will need to come up with a strategy for how to proceed, which will probably include having to have some discussion with Julie and then come up with a proposal that we can then send to Lead Vance, because if Lead Vance has to approve before we even go to DEP, we might as well get that out of the way before we waste any more time talking about this. Does that make sense?
And I'd
agree.
recommend, just, I'm looking at the petition to amend and it says nothing about lead vents in the covenant here. So it says you have to have DEP so I feel like that would be another
Right.
ask, I
We'll
guess,
find
is what the process is.
Yep.
exactly who it
So-
goes to first. DEP may go to lead vents after they get it, but it's not in the covenant, actually.
All right,
We,
are people okay with that as a strategy for next meeting that the subcommittee will reconvene and move forward and report back to committee again?
it's also
okay?
part of the rules of the, even asking for it. If you look at the actual law on it,
If what?
if you look at the actual law on the process,
Okay, that'd be good to see.
All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just that.
So-
So we know.
there's, it's like, yeah, you gotta do some digging to find it.
Okay.
So I will rule as the chair that the subcommittee will reconvene. All right, and we will report back to the committee in April. And by golly, we're gonna do something. At some point, we'll get it done, but okay.
Well, thanks.
Thank you all very much. Thanks Patty and Carl and Gail. And Janet, let me turn it over to you to introduce Morgan, since I don't.
All right, so this is Morgan Price, and she's with Mid-Coast Conservancy and based in the Waldeboro office, right on Main Street, and has done a lot of work with trails. She's involved with also water quality on the river and has many hats, but, and I'll just give a description. Yeah. And, just a little background, we met with the Madomic Council Trail Crew, which is Charlie Witherell and company, or just Charlie came, and Mike and Carl, I mentioned this before. And it sounds like Midcoast is completely on board with partnering on figuring out where and actually helping to build the trail. We haven't talked about stewardship yet in the long term, because I was thinking about the maintenance costs of the courts. There's also going to be maintenance costs if there's a trail system, so we have to add that into the cost. And so Morgan is here I just asked you here, so mostly so we could ask questions. We still haven't talked as a committee, for instance, about, do we want this trail to be sort of a nature trail? There's been our recreation person who's not here because he's sick, thought, well, you could also have a disc golf through the woods there. Are there things that, we haven't decided as a committee with a recommendation on how it should be used? Is it mostly just for walking and hiking and or for multi-use? We have decided it's not good soil for anything but feet. Okay. And we also know through the covenant, you cannot disturb the soil other than, probably putting in a bridge or that kind of thing, but you can't like resurface and harden trails. I don't think. Maybe we could get permission to do that, but so far we can't disturb the soils in the covenant. So I guess my question, I'll just throw it out as a starter, is a process. The other thing I'll mention is there's the cap that you drive by all the time. And there's going to be an engineering study to figure out what it's going to cost to cap it so that you could do something with cap. So right now, the trail, you've walked it, Morgan's already walked part of it anyway, not this part. And we've walked it a couple times. But where you would start the trail with a cap there, makes sense in a time frame? Do we wait till that's done and then think about the trail? So I guess we're looking for some advice based on your experience on pressure. Next steps. Well, as you can see, there's a lot in play here.
Yeah.
but-
Yeah, I guess I don't have like a lot to bring as far as like at this moment, but like tonight of like information to tell you guys, but I guess Midcoast Conservancy is super interested in partnering in some way, and just being a part of the conversation to figure out what way will that be. Like Charlie and crew definitely want to build something. Like I have some surveying and trail building experience, and so do some other people at Midcoast Conservancy. So I guess definitely just having the discussion of like, what do you want? What is the timeline? Okay, so it's for feet only. I don't have a lot to like tell. Also, just trying to get in the same room, which first step, and be on the same page and figure it out. Because
I just got a quick couple questions. On the trail, when you design it, this is just for instance, say who maintains it? So like there's not a branch or something and someone trips over it and then they start lowering up. And then the second question is, would the Waldeboro Conservancy publicize this so people know that there's a trail?
So that the branch falling on the trail, that falls under like stewardship, which Janet was just talking about. Like, okay, we build the trail, how do we maintain it? So like does Midcoast Conservancy, like, is that how we contribute? Is we
Right.
take over that? Does the town do that? Does some of the committee, like who, yeah, so that is someone, that's part of like stewardship and figuring out the stewardship costs of that. And then, yeah, we definitely, like, obviously, if you guys wanted it on our website and being publicized, it definitely can be. And if you don't want it, then it doesn't have to be, because every trail we have, like, some we blast and some we're just like secret trails because we don't want a bunch of traffic there. But yeah, so yeah, whatever the committee and whatever would best for that trail, yeah, it can be publicized on our website as a partnership trail, because we have one of those with Sweetgrass Winery. Like, we have a partnership trail that's on our website, but it's not ours. Yeah, so yes, we can do that.
You know, in terms of stewardship, Charlie's crew maintains most of the trail systems in the Madomic watershed already.
Mhm.
They go out when a tree falls down, they cut it up, move it, branches, whatever, on a regular basis, and signs.
Yep.
And, you know, that's another question for us is, you know, Midcoast has their signs. With their logo and
Yeah.
uses, you know, usually at the trailhead. So we can talk about those kinds of things too. And I don't know how expenses, you know, if Midcoast would want to have expenses covered.
Right.
We haven't gotten that far.
Signs would be good because, you know, are you familiar with Peter's Pond?
Yeah.
That I went in there and there was no signs and I got scared to death because I thought I was lost.
Well, it's easy to get lost back there because,
Seriously.
yeah, there's a lot of
Right.
just like foot trails and stuff, and you don't actually know which ones are. See, this is the good feedback that we love to hear.
Right, okay.
Can't fix the problem if we don't know about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the issue though, for me, is I feel like we got the ball rolling with trails a little bit, you know, even started aging and flagging a little bit. But I personally feel like we need to know what the scoop is on the pad
Mm-hmm.
and have that work done before people are wandering through there.
Yeah.
And so until the study's done, we don't have the timeline for that. And that will once we know that, yes, it's going to be capped in X year, say next year, hopefully, or then we can say we'll start building the trail right after that.
Yeah,
That doesn't mean you can't be planning it potentially,
for sure.
parts of it anyway, but you're not going to know where the best place to park, you know, where do you want
Yep.
to put the kiosk?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I know everyone's really excited about the trail because I don't know if any of you guys have been back there, but it is beautiful. It's wooded. It's right on the water. You know, like access to Clam Flats, beautiful seagulls and eagles all flying around. But yeah, doing it correctly is really important, and that means not always rushing it. And like, yeah, like Jared said, having that correct timeline. And yeah, the cap, that's a lot of machinery and stuff. And so yeah, you don't really want the public around that. So yeah, to me, it makes sense, like after the cap, then, okay, like this, yes. Because then you can figure out like parking, trailhead. So I know with Max, and like where Max was like, oh, this would be the best access point as far as like parking. But then you look and it's like this steep embankment all covered in rows of multi-floor, and you're like, we can put a trail there, but it's gonna take a lot of time.
Fair, I said that would be after we did the.
Yes. This
Throw me on
This
the bus.
this is what relayed. I'm not saying that this is, yeah, not at all. But then it's like, oh, it's actually really easy to walk in over on this side, but then you have to walk through the cap and through the fields and like, so yeah, trying to figure out.
Max, excuse me, if I could clarify based on what Julie said about Lead Vance having to approve anything regarding the house. Do we need to have a plan to send to Lead Vance about the trail system? Before we get too far along to make sure that they're gonna go along, and the same thing with the tennis and pickleball courts?
All recreation items were things that Lead Vance were told about when the donation process was happening. If they, for some reason now say, no, we don't want any recreation whatsoever, they're kind of faulting on the whole reason why we were taking it in the first place. So then it starts getting into all this legal back and forth.
Do we have that in writing somewhere?
What we were outlining the donations were going to be, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That was what I sent to the Sylvania committee when we were initially talking about the donation back in 2020.
Okay,
Yeah, Max actually drew up a plan.
right, I sort of remember that,
Yeah.
but Lead Vance approved of that.
Yes, they looked at it and said, we want this to be what
Okay,
we're doing. with
I
it."
just want to make sure that that's all taken care of, it, so that it's only the house that has to be micromanaged.
Part of that whole agreement was that recreation would be this big focus. We have a trail that goes down to the shore and everything. We wanted to do more trails throughout, that's fine. And then there would be the green space over at the capped area or whatever we're gonna do for recreation. And the Hofstas house and any construction we're gonna do was gonna be a multi-phase process that was gonna involve a lot of town input, and then it was going to involve this cooperation with the DEP.
Okay.
And that was all stuff that was lead advance, and here's Julie if she wants to add in any more to that.
No.
Yep, she's back.
Talk about throwing under the bus. No.
Well,
So I didn't mean to interrupt, but
I'm just curious if the town has any information on when the engineering study is likely to get, or to get done. And the other, I think, decision we haven't made is originally we thought, well, if the Hofstas house is gonna get demolished, the cap should incorporate that, you're gonna have a foundation, but now I'm thinking, okay, let's just put the Hofstas house in a different category. But what's the time frame on a cap roughly? Do we have an idea of that?
No, he needs direction from us on what we would like to see.
Right, so we go round and round.
You need an RFP.
Well, he
I
needs
thought
to,
you said we didn't have to do an R.
no, if you'll recall, when he was here, he said, I need to know what it is you want.
Right.
Once we determine what we want, then he can start and come up with. We hadn't given him any guidance on what we wanted to see.
Okay.
Numbers, size of port, where you want it, how you want it to look. So he hasn't done anything until he hears from us.
So maybe the next meeting, here's a proposal.
well, I wonder if we could have another subcommittee who'd be willing to work on the proposal. Because we have that drawing from Marcus indicating where the courts would go and how much of the foundation would be used. And then we know basically where the good places for the trailheads are.
The trail heads, but for the trails.
For the trail.
Do we have to prepare a document for the engineer? Do we have to give him information in writing or a map? Perhaps,
It
does
would
this
be-
committee have to do that?
What I think would happen is, he said he'd come back once we decided what way we wanted to go, and he would take our input on what you wanted to see. That was how I recall it ending, that we need to give him information so that he knows what he's actually working on. Is it 2 basketball courts, 2 tennis courts, 2 pickleball courts? How big are they? Do you want lighting? Do you want picnic tables? Like, what do you want?
It was 2 tennis ball courts, which
But 4 pickleballs on it.
2 tennis courts, which would be 4 pickleball courts and a basketball court.
And did anybody ever talk to the recreation committee? At the last meeting, I believe I brought up that,
Yeah, he came at the last meeting, didn't he?
right, but he's our recreation director, but I don't know that the committee ever got connected.
No. No, as far as I know, nobody here has gone to the recreation committee.
See, I was looking at it as the flip side, the engineering study, and maybe this group isn't the one to do it. You look at this thing. And somebody comes to us and says, you could cover the whole thing with bentonite here if you want half of it in concrete or whatever, hardened for the courts. You've got this big pile of rubble here, which is a safety hazard. Are they going to cover that? How do we know what's?
Well, I think we have to give him the bare bones of what we want.
Okay.
And tell him, hey, we also have these issues. And I talked to Max, and he needs, one of the things that Max said, and I, to be honest with you, I can't remember if I said this at the last meeting or not. One of the things that he needs is the GPS coordinates of everything that we want to ask him about, so that when all the snow's gone, they can come out and take a look at it. So you said there was a pile of rubble. I mean, these are
You can see it, right? I don't have to take a GPS. It's right here.
no, but there were other areas people mentioned too.
Yeah, I mentioned, and there's a cedar thing with a weird hidden
Looks like-
wellhead. I can
looks like a
point to
pump
it. It's
station,
better
yeah.
than a GPS point because it's right here on the map, and other than that, it's all the wellheads and those are on the survey.
Okay,
The only question mark was that stream, which has nothing to do with the engineering study of put all the debris in it.
he said anything that's laying on top of the ground, we can pick up and remove. So I could send Public Works in and pick up. and
Oh,
remove.
okay. Oh, well, that's good to know.
So I have a quick question
Yeah.
on that, because the stuff's been sitting there quite a while, and as we know, things will grow over things and start to literally compost over time, becoming part of the soil. So are we okay with having to do that? If you know, when you go to remove some of the stuff that's been sitting, it's gonna disturb what's grown on top of it, what's been
I
composted.
can
on top of
ask
it.
him, and I mean, I would have Public Works do that. It's not like I'm expecting people to go into it.
No, but just
Yeah.
generally speaking, like what it constitutes disturbing the soil, the stuff
He
that's.
says if it's
underneath
laying on the
this-
ground,
Yeah, this,
Mm,
I mean, there's stuff that's clearly been dumped in a stream. You walk
Sure.
by, you see it.
Yep.
So anything that's really visible and could be a sharp rusty thing you could get cut on.
You know what I mean, though, over time, like the ground moves a little bit, mud moves a little bit, things sink into the mud. Now are we disturbing the soil or not?
Well,
at that
some, I
point?
imagine you will be pulling out and
Right.
but the risk of leaving it, I think is probably
Oh, yeah.
greater. I don't know if that would constitute
I can ask, but
soil.
I know when
disturbance.
they went through and they cut a lot of the vegetation down on top of the pavement. Our Public Works Director had a conversation and they were very clear about what he could or couldn't do. So that was good.
We're almost at the end of a lot of time now. So how do we need to move forward with the engineering study and getting information about the cap?
So I think what we have to do is decide, we have to give to him the actual, what we want to see as far as number of courts, size of courts, what, anything else you would like him to do. And then he'll work from there. We just have to give him firm direction. But before we do that, somebody should really, or maybe we invite members of the Recreation Committee just to sit down with you guys too.
I almost feel like, I mean, I don't know if we could vote half of one of these meetings for starters with the Recreation Committee and just sort of brainstorm. I mean, when I look at this, I say, we want to get rid of this hideous looking thing and cover the whole thing somehow with something. But then I think of I mentioned the Belfast City Park, which is sort of like this. It's within walking distance of town. It's probably about the same size. I mean, how many parking spaces are we going to need?
Well, I'm gonna
Yeah,
tell you, I was
so-
gonna
yeah.
share with you guys, I went to the bowling alley for my grandson's birthday party. And across the street in the Sylvania, there was double-sided, every parking spot was taken in that first
Yeah.
spot there, and the place was filled. I mean, it was, I actually took a picture to show you guys, that first whole line on both sides was filled. So just had,
For customers at the bowling alley.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah, actually, I mean, I wasn't
that'd be
upset about it
excellent
at all, but it was,
use.
to me, it was
Yeah.
something that was neat, that,
Okay.
hey, look, it's being used.
So again, we need to move on. So Morgan, what quick question?
Oh, no, this has nothing to do with why I'm here. This has to do with, just a general question is that, yeah, the bowling alley uses that, like, it is, like, yeah, I live down Friendship Way, so do you. So yeah, you see, well, I don't know. You drive by the bowling alley late at night,
Somebody
it's
there.
always like the Sylvania parking lot is like very well used.
It
That
is
is-
public parking.
Yeah, so I'm just gonna,
Use it
yeah,
myself.
nothing to do with
Yeah.
like why I'm here. I was just like commenting, like
Gotcha.
I drive by that place
Yeah.
like almost every night,
It's
late at night.
rocking.
And it is, the Sylvania parking lot is definitely used.
But I mean, like, we have to consider too, I think I even mentioned is like, could we have an open pavilion on there too, along with the courts and things? So I think those are things that we just have to give Rob some direction on, and then he can run with it. And
But
Again, I think we need to get a small group focused on this, because if we keep going around in this big group discussing this without any kind of direction, we're not gonna make any progress. So are there people who are willing to work on putting together a plan for use of the site, the recreational use of the site, the courts, the walking trails?
Mark, you're really not talking about a plan as much as you are a list.
Right.
That's all. It's just a list of what we would like to see on.
Well, right.
And then he'll figure it out.
That's all we need. That's
all we
fine.
need.
So is there anybody willing to do that?
And I'll take a stab at a list. In terms of a committee, 2 months coming up, I can't be involved with
Okay.
any amount of time, but I could just brainstorm a list. But I do
And-
feel like we need some more expertise, like I don't know how many parking, sort of projected use, how much parking would we need?
But he'll know that.
Yeah.
He
and-
just needs to know, we want this many courts, we want a pavilion. And he'll figure out the rest.
And we obviously want a lot of parking.
A lot of parking and covering all the dangerous stuff. That's really,
Okay.
and then we can go from there.
All right, so Janet, you're gonna work on that for,
I'll do a brainstorm list.
okay,
Brain dump list.
thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have anything else, except I need to talk to Lily afterwards. Does anybody else have anything for the committee?
I just had one question, and I think we went over it. But in all of this stuff that we're gonna do or attempt, does Leadvians have to give the okay to what it is that we ultimately decide? Because
So-
we're changing the topography
The,
of that.
the Uniform Environmental Covenants Act is what governs it.
Okay.
So,
That's scary.
and the covenant itself. So
This is just.
again, that's gonna be, I think they do have to. It's my,
off.
has always been my understanding that whatever we do there, they're gonna have to sign off on.
Okay, so-
And if it's in the spirit of what we presented to them during the gifting process,
Right.
they would be amenable to that.
Can those documents be made available for us to review?
The covenant and the
Whatever the.
The uniform, I can try, there's a lot to it. I actually had to Google it and get into the uniform environmental, just
Okay.
based on what was written in the covenant.
Yep.
So yes, I made copies, but then I think I printed the wrong one because it
Okay.
talks about this being in water.
I happen to know an excellent researcher I can put on this.
Yeah. Well, but it's complicated.
But anyway,
That'd be
if you
good.
could make that available, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah,
send
like I
information.
said, I think it's title 31, but then
Yeah.
when it prints out, it says it's for water and navigation, and then I'm like, that might not make sense.
Okay. Right.
So,
Bob,
Could we get a copy of the Leadvance contract, or
you mean covenant?
is it
there, that's
covenant, is it 300 pages? or
No,
is
it's
it
No,
the
20 pages?
covenant is just the thing we already have. this
Oh,
thing.
okay.
yeah, I can't find my copy, so if you
Of
could,
course.
if you
We
could
can
make
do
that
that.
available, it'd be great. Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. This is,
Wow.
wow. I don't know why I ever agreed to this. But anyway, thank you for your participation, and we'll get back together again, and hopefully the snow will be melted and we can see the place and we can walk around without traipsing.